But today I'm just going to talk briefly about the seventh day of unleavened bread, which is the Solemn Assembly. And I'm talking briefly about it because it's a very, very simple festival of the Lord. It's a required holy convocation. As I had shared earlier, and this used to be a mystery to me years ago. You know, all the feasts they all seem to kind of blend together. It's kind of the same thing with tiny differences and nuances, but I've been discovering that they're all very different from one another. You know, Passover's an all-out celebration. First day of unleavened bread is a notch down, and the seventh day of unleavened bread is even lower yet. And as far as celebratory is what I'm getting at, it's a solemn assembly. So we'll just look at the scriptures to see what the word says about this day. Numbers 28:25 says, "On the seventh day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no laborious work." And Leviticus 23:8 says about the same thing. "But for 7 days you shall present an offering by fire to the Lord, and on the seventh day as a holy convocation you shall do no laborious work." And I listed those just in the vines, I guess, just so you could see what those words are. It's a Mikra Kodesh, holy convocation, and that's it's for the Sabbath. It's for just about every festival there is except for first fruits. It's a holy convocation. It's a required meeting where you come together and get together and meet. But the seventh day adds one thing to that, or the Lord did something slightly different to it, and we find that in Deuteronomy 16:8. It says, 6 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a solemn assembly to the Lord your God. You shall do no work on it. And it's really funny. If you look at, different versions, you'll find words that seem interchangeable, but they're different Hebrew words underneath that have different meanings, and why they sometimes use the same word to represent very different meanings is beyond me. A simple example of that is love. There's 3 different kinds of love biblically. There's agape and I can't remember the other 2. Eros, yeah. And phileo, yeah. So there's 3 different kinds of love, and yet we use one kind of love, but they're actually very different terms. So anyway, we find that in the feast too, because sometimes it says, you shall celebrate. Well, it doesn't mean celebrate. It means you shall keep. Atzara, I believe, is the word. But it talks about sometimes what you think is a celebration really isn't. It's a requirement to keep it. So you really have to look at the feast days to really understand what God's heart is in it. Anyway, it's just funny. The feast days, you really have to look at them to understand what God's at. And I got to tell you, I hope someone gets a revelation on this or has it, because I don't. I don't understand why the seventh day as a whole is a solemn assembly. I'm looking back historically at the Israelites coming out of Egypt. I can't pinpoint a day 7, and I'm not sure that I can pinpoint one in the time of, Yeshua's resurrection. We certainly know what it was like for 2,000 years ago, what Passover was like, what on the first day of unleavened bread. It was just a busy time, a chaotic time, and certainly the same for the Israelites. Talk about a total change in everything. Your whole life's changing. You're being tested. It's a time of difficulty for everyone. So that is the season that we're in. And how many feel like you've had just a difficult time this season? Anyone? Me? I know I'm one. Yeah, there's a few of us. It can be a time of testing. And it's funny. God put all these different feast days. You've got Passover, then you've got immediately followed an all-night convocation. That next day you have you have an all-night vigil, then the next day is a convocation, then somewhere is a Shabbat, then you have the seventh day of unleavened bread, and then another Shabbat. So God packed, 5 pretty major events in an 8-day period. He could have spread it out if he wanted. He could have cut them down if he wanted, but I believe part of the plan is it is supposed to be busy and hard for us too. It's to stretch us, and it puts us probably in the same realm that, that the disciples went through at Yeshua's crucifixion, and what the Israelites had gone through, a lot of change, and it's a time of testing. We get pressed. And anyway, as I shared earlier, I'm still doing way too much in the flesh. God help me. So anyway, Deuteronomy 16:8 says, "It shall be 6 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a solemn assembly to the Lord your God. You shall do no work on it." And solemn assembly, it's 2 words in the English, but there's only one word in the Hebrew. It's atzara. It means an assembly, a solemn assembly, solemn assemblies. Its root word is to restrain, retain, close fast, confine, detain, detained, held back, shut down. It's got a holding back element to it, in its root word. Obviously, we could look up solemn, and that's, it's taking it down a notch. It's not the celebration. It's not the dancing. It doesn't say you can't celebrate, or dance, but in my thoughts, if he wanted us to celebrate, he would tell us. If he wants us to dance, he would tell us, which he did in Passover. And but this one, he's saying it's a solemn assembly. So for whatever reason, it's a lower notch down. Maybe it's just simply the excitement is worn off. We're out. Now we're out we're out in the wilderness now, and our food's running out, our water's running out. This is reality now. It was great and exciting, and we know this is the right thing, but this isn't as easy as we thought if we're looking at it in our own flesh. It's so easy to look back at them and go, you silly Israelites, didn't you know God is going to provide manna and water and food? And, here we are. How many times are we saying, Lord, are you there? Are you going to provide? Are you going to meet my needs? It's like we find ourselves doing the same thing, asking the same question, Lord, are you even present? It's just amazing. At least I know that's my testimony. So anyway, I listed it both in the Strong's and the Strong's dictionary, but it's this assembly that's basically a solemn kind of a thing. And just for grins and giggles, I looked at it in just a bunch of other versions to see what other people said, because there are some versions that just say you shall have a convocation, you shall have a meeting. It doesn't even say solemn assembly, and I'm like, how did we ignore that word at Sarah? But I listed a bunch up here, and you can just see solemn, 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 solemn. Most people got it right, that it is solemn. And there's one, I like the Young's Literal. They put 6 days thou dost eat unleavened things, and on the seventh day is a restraint to Jehovah. They don't even call it a convocation, but they call it a restraint, and that's that root word of atzar, to hold back, to restrain. So, they certainly pick up on, there's something about it it's not this all-out thing that it was. It's restrained, and God help you all figure it out, because I don't know what that means and what it looks like. But I think the analogy, the comparison is it's not the celebration anymore. It's not the party that we had. It's now there's some solemnity that God is weaving in that's supposed to be part of this festival. And that's basically it. There's, I could go over all the details on all the other words that make up the convocation, but I think we get all those. This is the only difference. It's a solemn assembly, and then the last thing I want to talk about, because this will be implemented prior to the next time we get together for Shabbat, and that is the Festival of Weeks. And there's a lot on it, and I'll be talking about it in the coming weeks. But one thing we do have to start is this count, okay? So I at least want to give a brief scripture on what this counting thing's about. The typical phrase is count the omer. And if you say count the omer, great. That's great. Nothing wrong with it. But scripturally, we aren't counting an omer. An omer is a measure of wheat, and we're not counting this measure of wheat. We're just counting 50 days. Nowhere in the Bible does it say count the omer, or we're counting the omer. I mean, there's nothing like that. We're counting 50 days. We're counting 7 complete Sabbaths, and on the day after the Sabbath, that's when Shavuot or Pentecost or Feast of Weeks is. But we count to it. And I explained, I think, last week that in Judaism, they always put it at Nisan 16 and Sivan 6 for first fruits and Shavuot, respectively. And my interpretation is if it were those dates, God would have just said it would have been a whole lot simpler than to say the day after the Sabbath, count 50 days, and then the day after that Sabbath. So my take is what God gave is the simplest form, because the dates change, and the 7 complete Sabbaths is Saturday to Saturday. That's a complete Sabbath. So my opinion. Anyway, so we'll look at Leviticus 23:15, which talks briefly about this. It says, "You shall also count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day when you brought in the sheaf for the way of offering, there shall be 7 complete Sabbaths. You shall count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. Then you shall present a new grain offering to the Lord." And then skipping down, on this same day, being Shavuot or Pentecost, you shall make a proclamation. as well. You're to have holy convocation. You shall do no laborious work. It's to be a perpetual statute in all your dwelling places throughout your generations. So, as I taught last week, the day after the Sabbath, once Passover comes, which was, what was it, Monday night this year? Monday night. So now we're waiting for the Sabbath, which would be today. Today is the day after, or today is the Sabbath. So from the day after the Sabbath, the day after you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, there shall be 7 complete Sabbaths. So if you start tomorrow, 7 complete Sabbaths will be 49 days. Then the 50th day is going to be a Sunday again, the day after the Sabbath. So it starts on a Sunday. Actually, you start on, the day after. You start on a Sunday. You start your count and then go 49 days plus 1, 50. So it ends up always being on a Sunday, which could be perceived as an 8th day something. There's some kind of an 8th day hidden mystery in this thing, new beginnings or something like that. Lord will give us understanding. So that's it. So starting tomorrow, count 50 days. Some people take little wheat stalks, some people take little beans, some people take, I don't know, Erica and Abigail always have these fun little things. She makes it fun for the kids, for Abigail, and let's move our little bean from this pot to the next, or whatever. And some people just check on the calendar, and it's on the calendar. If you look at the any Jewish calendars, our counts are not going to align with theirs because they do the Nisan 16 Zivan 6 count. So we're not following that. But if you want to, knock yourself out, enjoy that. It's you can't just outright disprove it. It's really hard. But anyway, I've shared my strengths on why I believe what I believe. So, but that's what we're going to do here. So there have been times in my life when I've celebrated both the middle of the week one and the one on Sunday, because I've been on both sides of this issue in my life. So let the Lord lead you again. Anyone have any questions on these things here? Everyone's got it. Praise God. Yeah, that's great. That's good. What's that?
I said, or either everybody does.
Yeah, or everyone doesn't. I was like, I'm not going to ask that question. So anyway, tomorrow start counting 1 and count to 50. And some people start at 50 and they count down to 1. Again, it's hard to discern how you're supposed to count. It doesn't say count down, but it doesn't say count up either. So let the Lord lead on that. So. Thank you. Good job, Rudy. It starts tonight at sundown. Correct. Yeah. So tomorrow is technically anytime after sundown today. So if you want to do yours at nights, do that. If you want to do it in the morning, do that. But between sundown tonight and sundown tomorrow will be day 1 of our count. So you probably won't hear me refer to it as counting the Omer. I've been trying to break my own self from that, just saying it's, we're counting towards Shavuot, Pentecost, Feast of Weeks. It has multiple names. Hayes.
And the non-work day is sundown tomorrow through Monday night. Yeah.
Yes, Sunday night through Monday night sundown. Correct. Yeah, that's the 7th day of unleavened bread, and it's a no-work day as well. And as I shared last week, I got this great revelation. I love it. I'm just solid on it until someone can convince me otherwise. That the first day of unleavened bread and the 7th day are not Sabbaths. Sabbath innately means rest, and there's no command to rest on day 1 or day 7 of unleavened bread. So, Bill.
But the wave offering is done at a specific time in the morning, isn't it?
My understanding is they did it at 9 a.m. I don't know that, but my understanding was at 9 a.m., and that's what Yeshua was in the garden waiting for, was 9 a.m. He was going to present himself as the first fruits of all humanity before the Lord. So that's why he's hanging out in the garden,